Hello, I am incredibly honored to be speaking here at the Women in Business and Tech Expo 2021. Welcome to my session on championing an equitable workforce. My name is Danny Stacey. I work as an evangelist for Indeed. So I work with decision makers and business leaders at many of the largest organizations around the world to help them to be more successful. And a big part of that consulting is in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Work aside, I try and use my privilege to be the best ally that I can be. Now, my session is pretty jam-packed. There's a lot of data, insights, research in there. If you've got questions or want me to elaborate on anything, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email. I'll share my contact details at the end of this session, and I promise to get back to you. So I'm going to share my presentation with you now, and I really hope that you enjoy it. Now, for those of you less familiar with Indeed, we are the world's #1 job site. So we receive between 21 and 22 million unique visitors to our platform in the UK alone every single month. So here in the UK, if someone's looking for a job, they're probably doing it on Indeed. It's very similar in many other major markets around the world. During this session, we're going to explore how to affect change and inspire others in the pursuit of a more equitable workforce, breaking it down to more kind of core moments throughout the recruitment journey, including attraction, retention, development, rewards, and recognition. We're going to highlight key areas and opportunities to keep nudging the dial forwards. So whether you are leading from the front, or maybe you're looking for your next opportunity as an employee, you're going to leave this session with an increased awareness of some of the barriers in progress towards a fully equitable workforce, and equipped with actionable insights on how to navigate and overcome them. I'm going to start with this quote from Sheryl Sandberg, who you'll all know of Facebook. "We need to resist the tyranny of low expectations. We need to open our eyes to the inequality that remains. We won't unlock the full potential of the workplace until we see how far from equality we really are." I think that's a nice place to start this presentation. I'm going to just drop a couple of data points on you now. Let's start with gender. I'm going to be focusing predominantly on the UK, by the way, with this data, but much of the context that I'll cover does apply globally. Now, women represent just over 50% of the UK population, but women represent just 29% of all British members of Parliament and only 9.7% of executives in the FTSE 100 companies. When women were asked if they thought themselves and their colleagues being paid equally, regardless of gender, 56% said yes, compared to 80% of men saying yes. And 1 in 8 from the working age population is from a BME background, and BME individuals represent 10% of the workforce, but hold only 6% of top management positions. It's estimated that increasing workplace diversity can boost the UK economy by £24 billion a year. Now, these stats aren't here to kind of point fingers or stir emotions, but rather to show that despite progress having been made over the last months, years, some of us have been talking about this stuff for decades, the pace needs to at least continue, maybe even pick up. Now, I'm going to be talking around how companies can make diversity, inclusion, and belonging part of their DNA, but before we dive in, we need to define what we mean by these terms. Now, for Janina Kugel at Siemens as Chief Diversity Officer, she says diversity strengthens our innovative capacity, unleashes the potential of Siemens employees, and thereby directly contributes to our business goals. Here at Indeed, we believe diversity is about reflecting the global communities in which we operate. It's the belief that teams of different work styles, problem-solving techniques, life experiences, backgrounds, perspectives, skill sets, all of that is what makes innovation possible. We define inclusion as the actions and behaviors that create a culture where employees feel valued, trusted, authentic, that their voice is heard, and they can continue to fully thrive. And a focus on diversity and inclusion alone is not enough. Cultivating a sense of belonging for your employees is also crucial. Belonging is this feeling of community with people in an environment that makes us feel connected. Now, there's obviously a paradox, and that gets reflected in findings here from a global survey by PwC. 76% of business leaders indicate that diversity and inclusion is a stated value or priority for their organization, yet just 39% of respondents disagree with the statement that diversity is not a barrier to employee progression at their organizations. So we're saying it's important, but it's still clearly an issue. And when it comes to recruiting new staff, over half of workers say their organization has processes to ensure fair and objective recruitment. Again, if we break down the data further, we see it jumps to 66% for those at director level and above, and 45% below director level. So is there parity in our processes for all? And if not, then why not? Is the worker waiting tables less important than your finance director? Do we have to engage with different groups in different ways? Now, if you'd like to take a moment and play something for me, play a bit of a game with me. Picture a genius. Close your eyes. Picture a genius, someone alive today, a character from our history books. Get that person in your mind, someone, a genius, incredibly intelligent. Hopefully you've got them. Okay, open your eyes. Thank you. Does the person look anything like this? That slightly older mad scientist look, the hair that appears to have a mind of its own. Maybe you even thought of Albert Einstein on the screen, who's considered one of the greatest physicists of all time. Follow-up question. How many of you thought of a woman? Now, I know my audience today, and I appreciate maybe many of you did. I can't get a show of hands, obviously, in a virtual world. But for those of you that did, that's great. But if I had to guess, I bet many of you thought of a white European or American woman, maybe another Nobel Prize winner, Marie Curie. And that's because many of our thinking patterns are unconscious. They're a product of our upbringing, our schooling, our family and friends, where we choose to live and choose to work. And increasingly as a society, we're becoming aware of the fact we're making a lot of unconscious decisions. Maybe we've got some fans of The Voice watching today. The Voice took to a wider audience this relatively new way of assessing talent, a blind audition, a format that takes away the looks, that initial first impression that's based on nothing more than physical appearance, and instead focuses on the performer's actual ability to sing. And the show became wildly popular as a result. And Teresa McHenry, HRD at Microsoft, says, the point isn't to get people to accept they have biases, but to get them to see for themselves that those biases have negative consequences for others. To do this, we need to think about how we make complex decisions, especially decisions about people. So I'm going to share with you 3 incredible experiments now that summarize the challenges of human judgment and decision making. The first one, experiment number 1, the power of first impressions. So let's start with a very human question that matters to all of us in or around or involved in the world of recruitment. How long does it typically take for us to assess a person's competence, their trustworthiness, and their likability? Does it take a week? Does it take a day to really get to know someone? Could we do it in an hour, which, by the way, is the time of a typical interview? Actually, according to numerous studies, we make lasting decisions on people in less than a second. And we do this instinctively with almost no relevant information. Here on the screen now is a set of 4 faces. Any of you can look at a face and quickly determine whether it's more or less trustworthy, whether it's friendly or threatening. So what about these 4 then? Is there one that stands out as being a little bit more friendly than the others? And I suspect we're mostly on the same page, probably the one on the far right. Now, clearly these are just computer-generated images that I've put in front of you here, yet we still assign characteristics to these faces nonetheless. Some people just naturally have an RBF. It does not make them a bad person inherently. Now, these first impressions have real-world consequences, and of course, these instinctive first impressions are almost always wrong. So to experiment number 2, the limits of our rational thought. To help demonstrate, I want to introduce you to Professors Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, whose research and experiments have completely changed the world's understanding of the predictable flaws in the way we make seemingly rational decisions. Some of you might have read that book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where Daniel summarized much of this research. And one of the experiments that I particularly liked in the book was where Amos and Danny created a wheel of fortune, just like one you might see on a game show, and they numbered it from 1 to 100. I've put it here in denominations of 10 just to keep things simple on my slide. But this wheel was rigged. It's only going to stop on number 10 and number 65 when it's spun. In a controlled environment, Daniel and Amos asked for each participant involved to spin the wheel and write down the number on which it stopped. And then they asked these questions. Is the percentage of African nations among UN members larger or smaller than the number you just wrote down? And what is your best guess of the percentage of African nations in the UN? I imagine you're sitting there kind of scratching your head a little bit here. And the 2 researchers were really clear afterwards. The spin of the wheel shouldn't have any kind of useful information brought about from what it results in, let alone whether African nations are participating in the UN or not. The participants in the experiment should have ignored the spin, but in fact, they did not just ignore it. The number the spin landed on, it turns out, had a dramatic impact on the estimates participants provided. Those that spun a 10 estimated 25% of African nations are in the UN. Those that spun a 65 estimated 45% of African nations are in the UN. Daniel and Amos's experiments looked at the limits of rational thought. Our third experiment looks at how these questionable decisions can cause a cascade effect. Now, in 1920, Edward Thorndike studied the assessments of military personnel by their commanding officers on 4 dimensions. Each commanding officer rated soldiers on leadership, character, intelligence, and physique. Now, typically, what you would expect in an accurate assessment of traits is that on average, someone who might have strong character and strong intelligence, maybe they need further development in their leadership skills, maybe they need an extra visit to the gym. But that is not what Thorndike found. He found that officers usually judged their men as being either good right across the board or bad. There was little mixing of traits. Few people were said to be good in one respect, but bad in another. So how can this be? Do intelligent people have better character? Do people in poor physical shape have poor leadership capabilities? Well, psychology today has a possible explanation. It's long been noted that people tend to view others holistically, that is either all good or all bad. This is referred to as the halo effect because often it seems that one characteristic, positive or negative, seems to outshine others and bias our perception in that respective direction. So to the big question, does this happen in our workplaces? And I would, of course, suggest it very much does. According to some recent Gallup research, tall people earn, on average, nearly £250 more per centimetre annually than their shorter counterparts. Does that difference have anything to do with actual productivity? No, of course it doesn't. It's simply an added premium employers pay to taller employees. Let's take a look now at how we typically make hiring decisions, and in particular, the 5 critical moments when systematic human bias can unintentionally eliminate greatness. Let's explore these in a little bit more detail. Now, the first is when a candidate views a job description or a job advert. In recent research, we asked job seekers who were turned off by a job description why they decided not to apply. And I find the last one here amazing. 76% said they had concerns about the stability of the company. Now, clearly, no company would consciously say within a job description that their business might go insolvent. Yet job seekers still took away strong messages from the words that were there. The words we use in job descriptions, often which are very quickly crafted, have a really big impact on what people perceive about our companies. And sometimes they unintentionally limit your talent pool in really obvious ways. Even the number of required qualifications is going to shift the type of people that apply. There's a job here on the screen, an amazingly long list of qualifications. The last bullet point even references the ability to stand, walk, and sit. And I wonder how many of you have seen job postings that list desirable skills rather than required skills, those nice to haves rather than the need to haves. Because what the research shows, and this comes from Iris Benet at Harvard University, many women won't apply for a job unless they meet all of the listed requirements. Men, on the other hand, tend to have a lower threshold for applying. So in other words, men are more likely to overrate themselves, women underrate their abilities. And we see this in other demographics too, not just by gender. So what about sourcing? We know many companies encourage referrals, maybe even monetizing a referral scheme. Research shows referrals actually benefit white men much more than any other demographic group. And in addition, male referrals often ending up being paid more than equivalent female referrals. This in part comes down to the perception of a woman who negotiates hard on salary. What's also striking is both men and women who are hired via referrals on average earn significantly more money than equally qualified candidates hired through other channels. Our third moment is the screening of applications. Now, when we screen candidates, we inevitably need to make quick judgments on whether or not a CV or a profile fits with the job that we're trying to fill. According to our research, nearly 3/4 of job seekers spend 10 minutes or more updating their CV each time they apply to a new job. And when asked, 43% of job seekers think that recruiters spend 2 to 10 minutes reviewing each CV. Interestingly, more than 1/3 of job seekers think recruiters are spending 10 minutes or more reviewing each CV. which is kind of worrying because, as many of you will know, in reality, the time is much less. Gaze tracking technology, that's what we ask clients to get the recruiters to put the funky glasses on that track their eyes on the screen. That shows that employers spend an average of just 6 seconds reviewing each CV. And 80% of that review time is focused on just 4 things: the person's name, their previous company or the name of the job, the roles that they had, the position start and end dates, maybe scanning for gaps, and their education. Now, the risk here is obvious because when you make quick decisions, the risk that we focus on social signals and stereotypes, we're going to miss those nuanced clues about the person's skills. And in one fascinating study, 4 Dutch researchers set out to investigate how a criminal record affects an applicant's ability to get a job with some unexpected results. They were surprised to find that ethnic origin is a more powerful determinant of opportunity than a person's criminal background. Specifically, candidates with Dutch names were more likely to receive a positive response than those with Arabic names, even when the Dutch applicant had a criminal record and the Middle Eastern applicant did not. What about the interview? Well, job seekers know, we all know, that interviews are critically important. We've also discussed first impressions, but right now meeting face-to-face brings challenges. Whether virtual or IRL, it's difficult to ignore first impressions and to focus on skills and qualifications during an interview. And once again, the research is confirming this. In a famous experiment, Tricia Prickett, a psychology student, collected a series of videotaped job interviews. She wanted to test whether it was possible to guess the outcome of the interview by watching the videotaped interactions between the interviewee and the interviewer with no sound, by the way. What did she find? She found that an observer could predict with high accuracy whether or not the interviewee would be offered the job from watching just the first 15 seconds of the tape. That's a handshake, a hello, very little else. What happened in these brief few moments was enough to determine the candidate's future. And finally, moment number 5, the hiring decision. When it comes to hiring decisions, managers tend to favor candidates that are similar to them. And we all do this. And as Lauren Rivera puts it, in the absence of concrete answers to interview questions and reliable predictors of future performance, assessors purposefully use their own experiences as models of merit. If I put that in another way, we look to hire a mini-me, another version of ourselves. So in short, when it comes to effectively and fairly evaluating candidates, we've still got a long way to go. And once you hire the right people, how do you keep them? You need to think about how you reward and promote them. We'll talk about that now. Firstly, examine internal processes. You're likely already collecting some form of voluntary self-reported data from your current employees or even candidates, but are you putting that information to use? Analyze this data as it relates to recruiting, hiring, promotion, attrition rates. That's going to help you better understand the makeup of your existing workforce. And if you can, share your findings internally and externally, even if there's room for improvement. That's going to show a dedication to transparency and accountability. You can use your findings to inform your diversity and inclusion goals as well. It's not about recruiting and promoting solely based on that criteria, but using data to better understand your current workforce so you can make more informed decisions about where bias and barriers exist. Next, offer resources and support. Here at Indeed, we offer a variety of diversity and inclusion educational offerings. We've got those formal trainings on unconscious bias and allyship. We've got manager discussion guides about how to lead through difficult times. But I particularly here want to call out a crowdsourced compilation of resources, books, documentaries, articles, playlists for employees to contribute to other employees and support each other's learning journey. Finally, communicate regularly. When I break this down, firstly, we think about inviting ongoing dialogue about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, so employees know that they're welcome to share their experience and perspectives. That's going to help you create an environment of psychological safety where all team members can feel that they can ask questions, push against the status quo, and be vulnerable. And the second part to this, encourage storytelling. It's going to be a powerful agent for change. Stories that they really help people from different backgrounds understand what others are experiencing. They help us connect to one another. Ask employees to share their personal experiences on your company intranet, team messaging channels, other shared platforms. Employee resource groups, another great outlet for collecting stories, and collective voices shared together have a big impact. For example, here at Indeed, the Asian Network organized a task force to address the troubling rise in xenophobia and discrimination as a result of COVID-19. They created a hub for group members to tell their stories and shared educational resources for members and for allies. Thirdly here, survey employees to better understand their workplace experience. Make sure to dig into the data to better understand themes or trends. When you slice up the data, you're going to find employees from different groups or departments have different experiences. Again, I know there's a lot of information here. Reach out to me afterwards with questions, or you're going to have access to this presentation made available to you afterwards. Now, it's really important to approach employee conversations with empathy and intersectionality in mind. The term intersectionality, as many of you know, was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a professor of law at Columbia University back in 1989, to describe the way race and gender intertwine to uniquely impact the lives of Black women. And that concept has been expanded now to illustrate how all of our identities, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, so many others, all interact to shape our individual experiences. Here's a quote from Brittany Packnett, an activist and co-founder of Campaign Zero, who describes the way intersectionality shapes her unique experiences. I'm going to read this. It's not merely that some days I experience racism and some days I experience sexism. Rather, it's that oppression shows up differently for me than it does for Black men and for white women. If you understand this concept, it's going to help us to see how many of us are privileged in some ways and disadvantaged in others. Research also confirms that strong feelings of belonging among employees are linked to a 56% increase in job performance and a 50% drop in turnover risk, which results in annual savings of more than $52 million for the average 10,000 person company. It's a time to take stock of how our corporate culture and systems shape the way we work. A dedication to diversity and inclusion provides an opportunity for employers to make positive, lasting changes for employees, for your business, and more importantly, for society. Here now are 3 fundamental steps for creating positive, lasting change, starting from the foundations. And a good first step for managers and leaders is education and self-reflection. It's going to feel uncomfortable because it feels like inaction. It's a really important part of the process. To do this, listen, learn, and understand what's happening in communities outside of your own. Take the initiative to educate yourself, and from there, decide the best ways to be an ally and an advocate. Secondly, arm employees with tools to do the same. Consider providing educational resources and investing in company-wide training. And then thirdly, don't rely on marginalized groups to educate everyone else. Show them that you're taking on the burden of education. Now, as I noted earlier, we're all starting or continuing this journey from a different place. Since there's no silver bullet or one-size-fits-all solution to addressing diversity and inclusion, conducting a self-audit of your existing workforce data is going to help you narrow down your focus. In 2019, we declared the kind of culture that we want to have at Indeed, and the values that are important to us. The values for us are to put job seekers first, to pay for performance, innovation, be data-driven, and inclusion and belonging, which basically translates to creating an environment where everyone can bring their authentic selves to work and make it easy for others to do the same. To live to these values and to strive to improve them, we had to start with an assessment of our own current data. Listening to employees is a good first step in creating that sense of belonging. Does your organization take time to seek employee feedback about diversity and inclusion? And more importantly, does it provide a platform for them to share their stories and perspectives? Amplifying marginalized voices not only helps your employees feel heard, it's also going to help you to understand the strengths and challenges of your company culture. In addition to surveys, you've got focus groups, company-wide town halls. They're great opportunities to hear what's on your employees' minds. Some employees also conduct textual analysis of written performance reviews, exit interview notes, hiring memos to better understand internal culture and look for language that signals bias or negative stereotyping. So now you've got this baseline understanding of how diversity and inclusion manifests within your organization, ready to take what you've learned to implement meaningful change. It's important to know that successful diversity and inclusion initiatives require long-term dedication. Making culture shifts and changing systems is a marathon, not a sprint. We're going to explore now some ways you can create diversity and inclusion programs that are effective and sustainable. First, in order to be successful, you must treat diversity, inclusion, and belonging like any other important business goal. So firstly, this means the tone, it's got to be set by leadership, gain buy-in from the very top. That includes your CEO and your executive leadership team. For example, consider having your chief diversity officer report directly to the CEO. You can hire the best diversity professional in the world, but if they don't have the support from leadership to drive change, there's not much change they can actually affect. They're just going to quit in frustration. If you're serious about diversity and inclusion, invest in it. It takes time, money, and support to be successful, whether you're investing in education and professional development or working to change your hiring processes. And thirdly, hold teams accountable. For example, include diversity and inclusion metrics or program participation in performance reviews. Create an environment where employees feel comfortable reporting issues and enforce the consequences for anyone, regardless of position, who violates company policies. While your D&I program might be led by an in-house diversity team of HR, all executive leaders should be included in developing and supporting to be held accountable for your D&I goals. So with the insights and knowledge from previous steps in mind, let's walk through a few ways you can make diversity, inclusion, and belonging part of your core values. When we talk about core values, we're not just asking you to update the About Us section of your website. We're asking you to practice what you preach so you can create an inclusive culture across the entire company, rather than keeping it siloed in HR or employee resource groups. Now, one way to embody your core values is by updating your company policies to be more inclusive. It might mean adding zero tolerance policies for discrimination, bullying, and harassment. It could also mean removing existing policies that may inadvertently alienate marginalized groups, strict dress code, hairstyle policies, and the like. Next, offer resources and support for your employees. When traumatic experiences occur, employee morale, performance, psychological safety, it's all going to decline. Offer time off for employees to support mental health or make outside experts available. Employee resource groups can be another powerful safe space for employees to connect. For example, here at Indeed, the Black Inclusion Group organized healing hours facilitated by therapists and psychologists to provide a safe space for the Black community to share their experience while welcoming allies to participate as listeners and to learn. Thirdly, you can have admirable company values, but if it isn't reflected in your employees' day-to-day experiences, you've just missed the mark. Sometimes the issue of the frozen middle comes up, where top leadership and frontline employees are really bought into diversity and inclusion, but execution by mid-level managers is maybe a challenge. Going back to some of the steps we covered earlier, make sure to provide educational resources and training to managers and hold them accountable in order to create a truly inclusive culture. Use feedback from employees. You're then going to be able to identify specific areas of opportunity for improving employee experience. And finally, focus on long-term systemic change. Your dedication to diversity and inclusion shouldn't just be performative. It's not about standing in solidarity, offering a message of support, donating to a cause one time. It must come with action. With long-term sustainable action, we can continue to move towards workplaces that accurately reflect our diverse society. This is really beyond diversity. This is about reality. For example, here at Indeed, our mission is to help all people get jobs. Economic opportunity is core to the fight against racism, injustice, and inequity. We believe the more Indeed represents the world around us, the better we are at helping all people get jobs. One of the biggest opportunities is using our technology to reduce bias in product offerings, break down barriers to employment, and ensure accessibility. Thank you so much for listening. Although we don't have any time for questions right now, if you want to connect, as I said, or better yet, continue the conversation, you can reach out to me via LinkedIn, or there's my email address for you on the screen. As I said, I promise I'm going to get back, so I can't do the Q&A today. I really squeezed everything into 30 minutes, didn't I? Please enjoy the rest of the event. I think Karen's up next, and take care. Thank you.